Yizhao Martins, licensed marriage and family therapist, couples therapist. Today, I want to talk to you about this concept of ADHD Continuum. So most of my clients talk to me about their ADHD. They say something like, I have a diagnosis of ADHD, or my partner has an ADHD diagnosis, or they say, well, I think I have ADHD, but I don't have a diagnosis. I may be taking some stimulants for it. So they're talking about ADHD as a diagnosis. So we can't go into the spectrum or continuum of ADHD without talking about this diagnosis. I'm going to give you a very brief summary of the DSM-5 version of the diagnosis of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So according to the DSM-5, there are two presentations, or actually there's also combined presentation. The first presentation is inattentive presentation. The second one is impulsive hyperactive presentation, and sometimes they will diagnose you as a combination of both. And each of them requires adult to meet the criteria to get a diagnosis. You have to meet at least 6 symptoms of each presentation. The inattentive one has, mostly inattention related issues like attention to details, distractibility, and to follow through with things, forgetful, cannot organize things or tasks properly, and there's a huge avoidance for things that require details, repetition. And there's about losing things and belongings. So I'm just listing a few. If you're interested to know the exact diagnosis, I put a link down there. You can click on to see what does the DSM-5 say about inattentive and hyperactive impulsive presentation of ADHD. And they really emphasize this impairment in your social, in your academic or occupational, interpersonal lives, where you feel you are either underdeveloped, doesn't meet the certain target criteria. For example, if you're a child or teenager, and the school will assess you based on certain percentile. If you don't meet the percentile and the criteria for that developmental stage, they will be seen as meeting the criteria. If your ADHD symptoms cause those impairment for you. It's a little bit harder to assess that when you're adults, right? Unless you're going through a series of evaluations. Sometimes you may get that report from your boss. Sometimes the people with ADHD can mask really well, and they have developed certain strategies over the years and how to pull an all-nighter to get things done. And even in reality, it's very challenging for them to meet a deadline, and they tend to wait until the last minute and to not sleep and pull all-nighter and finish. And they suffer greatly physically and emotionally. And their family and partner, children suffer too along the line. Right? And some of the personal impairment is even more subtle, and you often hear that from the partner of someone may have ADHD or have some symptoms that they don't pay attention to me when we are having dinner. They always forget to get things, even I tell them so and so, and they lose things all the time. They ask me to be their mommy or daddy, keep track of their things. They talk nonstop, and they have unfiltered comments at social settings that embarrass me, stuff like that. So why do you need those diagnoses? I know I'm talking really fast here, I notice. Why do you need those diagnoses? One of the things, if you're going through insurance to get reimbursement for your individual or couple therapy, with a diagnosis, sometimes it makes the process more streamlined and easier for insurance company to reimburse you. Second, you are probably qualified to get stimulants and medication for the symptoms. When you don't meet the criteria, I guess you can get it from a a black market or some website, apparently I hear, that can give you medication, but not from a proper source like a psychiatrist, go through your insurance company. So diagnosis can be very helpful for that purpose. Also, some of my clients with ADHD, once they get their diagnosis of ADHD, they just feel this such relief. They feel this is the affirmation. All these years, I'm suffering from all of these symptoms, and now finally there's a name can be put on it, and there are a group of people that share those struggles with me. They feel that they belong. They feel they're validated and seen. But the other group of people that I know really don't like a diagnosis, especially when it comes from other people. They get triggered, right? Their shameful part get triggered and saying, oh, you're just trying to tell me that I'm not a good enough human being, that I am ADHD, right? So it really depends on the individual and how do they see and what does it mean, this diagnosis to them. So I generally don't have any preferences. I go for what my clients prefer, if they want an affirmation or not. Clinically, it's very helpful for me as a couple therapist to the client is open to certain kind of support, evaluation, medication, therapy support that make it easier to move the therapy process forward when some of the challenges in the relationship, particularly related to ADHD, get addressed and being supported and cared for by another professional. So how about we think about that now if you don't need a diagnosis, for example, or it's too late to diagnose because DSM-5 requires the symptoms has to show before age of 12. So if nobody still alive or can be in touch before age of 12 for you, like teachers from elementary school, parents, it's very hard to get the narratives from back then. So it's very hard to affirm the diagnosis. So for some people, it's impossible to do that. So when you don't get a formal diagnosis, and besides, all the reasons I mentioned above, I really think for most people, we're on this continuum or spectrum of ADHD. On this end, maybe 0 symptoms. On this end is a full-on diagnosis of ADHD, right, with 6 and more symptoms. So most of us are somewhere between those two extreme ends, may have 1 or 2 symptoms, and may have not persistently have them. The diagnosis also require you to have consistent, persistent symptoms for over 6 months, not just one day you didn't sleep well, you start to lose things and you cannot concentrate, right? And you're distractible, you're impulsive. That can happen to anybody who doesn't get a good proper sleep or eat something with chemicals and that make your brain scattered and impulsive. Or substance use can also cause ADHD-related symptoms. Even there's a book about breathing. Even you not breathing properly when you sleep, if you breathe with your mouth open, not using your nose and your lungs to breathe properly, and you don't get enough oxygen when you sleep, that can cause ADHD-like symptoms. So how do you think about this continuum spectrum thing? That actually it's not just I don't have ADHD, you have ADHD. It's more we're on this continuum. You may have more symptoms than I do. You may have it more often, more persistent. So there is no perfect person here, right? And we're all either more symptoms or more persistent or less and sporadic. And what's really matter is how that impact your life. If we honestly look at these symptoms, how does it impact my educational achievement, my school? Do I have to always pull all-nighters, work really hard before my finals, and always put my paper the last minute to complete? That I really get stressed out and burnt out. It may work when you're really young, as we get older, you have a job that requires you have a deadline to meet and you can pace yourself, plan accordingly, and you always resort to the last minute pulling all-nighters, it impacts your physical health, your mental health, and strains your relationship with other people, especially if you have a partner or you have children, that can impact them negatively as well. And how does it impact your self-esteem? One of the things DSM-5 doesn't talk about is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which can go hand in hand with ADHD. A lot of research has shown that people with ADHD tend to develop rejection sensitive dysphoria, and also they tend to have emotional regulation challenges. A lot of my clients with ADHD tend to be very cranky in the morning, and they need a lot of regulation. When they're young, they need co-regulation. When they're older, and they tend to need to develop that self-regulation so they don't spill their moods over other people that live with them. So mood regulation, emotional regulation, RSD, all of that comes with inattention and hyperactive impulsive symptoms, right? That can come together even though it's not part of the diagnosis. And they are also the one that impact, I notice, intimate relationship the most on your self-esteem and your emotional regulation. A lot of partners of their ADHD identified partner will say, well, my partner tend to be in such a sore mood in the morning that ruins everybody's mood, or my partner is so sensitive to anything I say to them, they just explode. Feels like disproportional. They really feel I'm criticizing, attacking them, while I was not, right? And that really strains your relationship. So if you would like to know more about the research on ADHD and diagnosis, how the brain functions, I will put down the link. Russell Barkley, he's really up to date with the ADHD research. But here, I really want to review and emphasize, think about ADHD as a continuum and spectrum, and we all somewhere out on the spectrum and the continuum, and then we all have many parts that could be very prominent and activated when you have ADHD symptoms. So one of the part, I call it the ADHD part, is a very young part, and that tend to be free, fun-loving, right? A lot of people tell me when they started date someone with ADHD, they were just swept off their feet, and this person is so unique and so different, so interesting and so exciting, right? The initial honeymoon period is very exciting, very different from any relationship they've ever had. That is the ADHD part. That's the spontaneous, the fun part, right? That really bring in the energy and spark to your relationship. And this part tend to be targeted and single out and blamed later when they're not taking responsibility for certain tasks like childcare and being consistent in a relationship. The manager is a part we all have. And I think for a lot of people with ADHD, this part is underdeveloped that need to be strengthened as for keeping an eye on the time, planning things, organizing stuff, keep your things with you, right? This part needs the more nurturing and support to grow. The inner critic. I notice my clients with ADHD tend to have a huge inner critic part, maybe because coming from the time when they were young and not diagnosed with support, and they're being criticized as being stupid, being slow, not try hard enough, being lazy. And they internalize those criticism, and they start to develop a part as the inner critic. We talked about the shame ball before. When the inner critic grow too big, it came down like a cover, and then the person crawl into a ball and cannot connect with themselves and with the outside. And the taboo lover, we also mentioned in one of our series, that like to push against authorities and rules and wanting to be different. So those parts are just some of the parts that you can commonly find in people with ADHD. As I said, we're on the continuum, so even you don't need a diagnosis of ADHD, you may still have those parts. I'm curious about what is your combination of parts and how young, how old each of this part is for you, how long they've been there and how well do you know them, and how do they function in your internal system. Do they help you? Do they sabotage you? Do they try to support you but not doing in a way that's very helpful? Well, you can comment down below and let me know what are your parts and how they're working for you. Until next time, bye bye.